This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and this is the Lenovo ThinkPad T14 Gen 2. So a storied line, the ThinkPad T line, 14-inch, is also available as a 15-inch Ultrabook for business users, and at least that's who they targeted at. And it's a bit of a confusing line too, but first let's talk about what it's not. There is also the ThinkPad X1 Carbon, no doubt you might be familiar with, which is a bit more premium, but starts at $150 more. This one starts at $1,307 currently for a Core i5 with 8 gigs of RAM and a 256 gig SSD. So it's also a little bit heavier, of course, than the Carbon, which is super light. This is 3.23 pounds, which is around 1.5 kilograms. So it's still a pretty easy carry, but there's also, in addition to our Intel version that we have here, an AMD version that they just released. So that one costs more, actually. It starts around $2,200 in part because it comes with more RAM and more SSD, so it's a little bit higher end configuration. And that's the Ryzen 5 and Ryzen 7 Pro, the 5000 series there. But there's still more. There's that ThinkPad T14S, which has not been updated to Gen 2 yet, and that one's just a little bit thinner and lighter. So this is the confusing spot in Lenovo's lines, what I'm trying to say. But if you're looking for a 14-inch business ultra portable for working at home or, well, working at work, then this might be the ticket. We're going to look at it now. And now shout out to our sponsor, the Dream L10 Pro. It's a robotic vacuum cleaner and mop in one, freeing up my time so I can make more of these videos for you. So it's a pretty nice looking product with a pretty quality build, and it has LiDAR navigation, and that's a superior form of navigation. Why? Because it maps the room without having to use nosy cameras that make you paranoid, and it has object detection. So that means one of the things that really holds me up using the robotic vacuum cleaner is I have to pick up every shoe and sock and everything that's on the floor. So this one spots objects, avoids them. Nice. It also has 3D sensors up front, cliff sensors, so no falling off down the stairs and all that sort of thing. And it can get over thresholds because it has some big beefy wheels on board. It has a good sized roller brush and the usual side spinning brush as well. And the mopping attachment connects magnetically on the bottom and has a good sized reservoir. And speaking of that, it has a very large dustbin with a washable filter, and the suction on this is 4000 PA, which is very strong, and it has 4 power setting modes. And now back to our video. So the laptop's available in the usual ThinkPad matte black, and there's also a storm gray option. Sounds a little bit like something out of a romance novel, but it looks pretty chill, so it's up to you for those of you who don't like that matte black look. Because this is Intel 11th generation U-series CPUs on board Ultrabook, and we have Thunderbolt 4, 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports. In fact, one of them you're going to use with the included 65-watt fast charger. And we have a lot of other ports on board. So this is where, you know, you make some compromises with the Carbon. Maybe you get even more ports here. You have 2 USB-A 3.2 ports. You've got those Thunderbolt 4. You have HDMI. You even have an Ethernet port, something you hardly see on a thin and light Ultrabook these days. Optional smart card reader, well, because it is for business. Headphone jack, of course, and besides the fact that we have Wi-Fi 6E on board, and that's an Intel AX210 card, you have optional 4G LTE. It's Cat 12, so not the fastest 4G we've ever seen, but, well, at least it's there. So if you opt with that, go opt with that one, you'll also have a nano SIM card slot. For graphics, Intel Iris Xe graphics, which is pretty good for integrated graphics. Now, there is an option for the NVIDIA MX450 dedicated graphics card, which we don't have. So that's an interesting card because it's using the same chip as you would see on a GTX 1650, but smaller memory bus, downclocked, all that sort of thing. So this is not a gaming machine, though it's funny, on Lenovo's website, they actually mention gaming. But if you're playing older games or something like that, you know, Bioshock Infinite or something like that, it'll give it an extra kick so you can do at least your 30 frames per second on high. For display options, well, let's talk about the bezels. I know that y'all always make comments about big bezels, but this is a bit, hello, 2005 is coming back with its big fat bezels. Not only that, it's a kind of a plasticky bezel on an otherwise really nicely built machine that really seems to catch lint and pet hairs and everything on the edges. So yeah, the Carbon is going to look a lot classier when it comes to that sort of thing. But the displays themselves, there's several different options. The base one is full HD, and they're all IPS. And it's a matte, non-touch display. And there's also a touchscreen option. Now, I can't tell you if that one's glossy or not. Lenovo uses the same language, so it might have the same anti-glare coating on. Then there's the 400-nit so-called low-power display that we've seen being used for a couple of years. That's the one that we have, also full HD resolution, also IPS. And there's a 500 nit privacy screen option, still full HD. And then there's a 4K UHD IPS display option for those of you who want to live a little large or have a higher quality display. Not an absolute must on something that's only 14 inches, but it's there if you want it. Our nominal 400 nit IPS Full HD display, the metrics are pretty decent on it. Didn't quite hit 400 nits. The color gamut's reasonably good on this for what it should be. The gamma and the white point are a little bit odd on this, but hey, it looks okay. The blue is over amplified for color accuracy purposes. If you really cared, you could use a colorimeter, but this is not a laptop that really is targeted at graphics professionals, so probably you'll be okay with it, is the idea. The keyboard, of course, is your usual comfy ThinkPad keyboard. Very tactile, very nice typing experience. And again, that gives it a little bit of a plus versus the Carbon because it gets to be a little bit thicker at 17.9 millimeters for the whole laptop. So you got a 1.8 millimeter travel for your keyboard. Nice. And the usual FN plus spacebar to activate the backlighting. Trackpad is your typical ThinkPad trackpad. It works just fine, and you have the eraser stick pointer on board for those of you who like the nav stick style navigation instead of using the trackpad. Since this is a basic bread and butter kind of business laptop, you have lots of dock compatibility, not just the latest Thunderbolt Gen 2 dock that Lenovo makes, but their Pro and their Ultra docks, and also even the old mechanical sliding dock are all compatible. The idea with this laptop is businesses tend to buy these and they want to be able to retrofit existing accessories. So it does indeed do that. In terms of performance, it's pretty much where we expect it to be. I would just say pretty much because it could do a little better and you can help it to do a little bit better. Intel 11th Gen Core i5 and i7 CPUs, again, on board here. vPro is optional. So RAM, some of it is soldered on board. You can get with either 8 or 16 gigs of DDR4, 3200 megahertz RAM soldered on board, and there's one RAM slot. So they have configured it with single channel, basically, that single soldered module on board. So you get a little bit of a performance hit because dual channel is faster, which just means matching RAM. So if you get it with 8 gigs, buy an 8 gig DIMM. If you get it with 16 gigs, get a 16 gig DIMM, and you got 32 gigs for total there, and you'll get even a bit better performance. That said, in benchmarks, it actually did pretty well. Again, we have the one with integrated Iris Xe graphics, not the NVIDIA, so that's all we can test for you. One thing I will say, the thermals on this are a little bit hot for a 14-inch Ultrabook, especially one that's not uber skinny, you know. In both touching the surfaces when it's working hard, say doing benchmarks or 2 concurrent challenging tasks at once, or just looking at the CPU temperatures, they tend to run high on benchmarks. Usually we don't see Ultrabooks spend as much time at near 99 centigrade for CPU cores, which is close to the allowable max. It's a pretty good sized fan inside, so what the deal is, I don't know if this will be ameliorated with future BIOS updates, but it does run a little hotter. And that means you'll hear the fan a little bit more than usual too. That said, when it comes to heat and noise, for the tasks that this is really designed for, which is your typical business Ultrabook user who spends most of their day in Office or in Slack and messaging and Zoom calls and all that sort of thing, maybe some Photoshop, a little excitement with PowerPoint, you know, it's not going to get that hot or that loud doing those things. But if you do push it, if you do decide to play BioShock Infinite, for example, or try to use Adobe Premiere, that's when you're going to say, well, this thing is getting rather toasty. In terms of battery life, we have a 50 watt-hour battery inside, a little bit smaller than the X1 Carbon, which has a 57 watt-hour battery. Still, that's a pretty good capacity. But battery life, this is just not a power-frugal machine. Again, maybe a BIOS update's going to change it. Along with the thermals being on the high side, it seems like it's using a little more watts than the average 14-inch Ultrabook with an Intel 11th Gen U-Series CPU inside. So Lenovo claims 10.7 hours, and, you know, manufacturer claims are optimistic, and that seems relatively low for a claim. And in fact, I was averaging about 7 hours, and that's with the full HD display. The 4K display would no doubt be lower in battery life, and the one with the NVIDIA DGP would probably be a little bit shorter than that too. All right, bottom cover, lots of ventilation. Even though this is a kind of toasty customer for an Ultrabook, it's not because there's a lack of vent holes. To get the bottom cover off, all the visible Phillips head screws, just unscrew them and then work your way around the guitar clip. The clips are a little bit surly on this. They really hang on, and it is a kind of wraparound design, so you're going to have to, you know, pry up here when you take it off, and there's the bottom cover. And here are the internals. 50 watt-hour battery taking up most of the space. This is the slot where the optional smart card reader would go over here. The speakers are up-firing, pretty good sounding actually. Good amount of volume, some bass even, so you can't see them from the underside since they are up-firing. Again, RAM, some of the RAM is soldered on, either 8 or 16 gigs, depending on how you buy it, and you can add some more RAM here. There's a single slot, DDR4, 3200 megahertz, the usual 1.2 volt SODIMM module that you put in there. Fans are pretty good size on this, and we have our M.2 standard 2280 full height SSD slot right here. If you did go with that 4G option, this is the slot for it right here. And lastly, the Intel Wi-Fi card is soldered on right here. Now, if you do want that 4G, be sure to order it with it because you won't get the antennas and stuff. And speaking of the little touches that Lenovo does well, see these rubber blocks here? These are actually wire guides to keep everything tidy and so nothing gets fried or damaged by touching the wrong place on the motherboard. And though we can't see the up-firing speakers, my assumption that this shock-mounted little module here are the stereo speakers that thus fire up. This is the bottom side. So that's the Lenovo ThinkPad T14 Gen 2. So it's an iterative update here, no redesign or anything like that. And the pluses for this are deep key travel, a really comfy keyboard. It's relatively speaking pretty thin and light, even if it's not verging on carbon territory. And a lot of ports here. I mean, Ethernet on an Ultrabook, you just don't see that anymore. Some of the caveats are it runs a little hotter and louder than average for a 14-inch Ultrabook, which maybe Lenovo can improve upon. And display options are pretty decent for this class of machine too. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more cool tech videos and hit the notification bell so you know about them.